Agilent Community School was a place of learning, but one name turned it into a place of fear. Amina. She was 21 years old and had repeated classes 5 times, yet she remained indifferent. While others struggled to pass, she didn't care. Teachers feared her, students avoided her. Even the principal hesitated to call her out. Amina did as she pleased. She skipped classes whenever she wanted. When she showed up, she would sleep right in the middle of a lesson, daring anyone to wake her. Authority meant nothing to her. But worst of all, she thrived in chaos. Fights, she started them. Rules, she broke them. Punishments, she laughed at them. If anyone dared to challenge her, they would regret it. Amina was not just a student, she was a storm, leaving destruction in her wake. And in Agilent Community School, no one could stop her. The morning sun was already high when Amina strolled into school, her uniform untidy, her sandals dragging against the ground. Late again. At the gate stood Obadele, the most feared senior in school. Tall, broad-shouldered, and ruthless, he ruled the junior students with an iron fist. But today he had a different target. "Amina," he called, blocking her path. "Why are you late?" Amina didn't stop. She didn't answer. She simply walked past him as if he were invisible. Obadele's jaw clenched. Nobody ignored him. "You think you can do as you please?" He grabbed her arm roughly. "You'll learn respect today." He dragged her to the assembly ground. The entire school watched in silence. As punishment, he flogged her in front of everyone. 10 hard strokes on her back. When she didn't flinch, he ordered her to cut grass under the scorching sun. Amina's eyes remained cold. She bent down, grabbed a handful of grass, and squeezed it in her fist. Then she turned to him and said, "Be prepared, and don't run home after closing." Her voice was calm, but something about it sent chills down Obadele's spine. School ended. Students rushed home, but Obadele never made it past the school gate. Amina was waiting for him. She struck first, knocking him down. Before he could react, her fists rained down on him, merciless, relentless. Obadele, the terror of juniors, lay on the ground, battered and bleeding. That was the day the school learned a new lesson. It wasn't Obadele they should fear. It was Amina. The history classroom was filled with murmurs as Mr. Okonjo, a patient and well-respected teacher, stood at the front. He had seen many difficult students in his years of teaching. But Amina, she was different. That morning she walked in late, again. But this time, she didn't even bother to find a seat. Instead, she dropped onto a desk near the window, pulled out a steaming plate of food, and started eating right in the middle of the lesson. Mr. Okonjo sighed. Amina put the food away. She ignored him, chewing loudly. The students held their breath. No one dared to disrespect Mr. Okonjo. "Amina," he said again, this time firmer. "I won't say it again." Without looking up, Amina picked up a chicken bone and threw it at him. It landed near his feet. Gasps filled the room. The teacher's face darkened, but he remained calm. "Leave my class," Amina smirked. Then in one swift motion, she lifted her plate and dumped the entire meal on his head. The classroom erupted in chaos. Mr. Okonjo stood frozen, soup dripping down his face. Something snapped inside him. The calm, patient teacher was gone. With a sudden movement, he slapped Amina across the face. Silence. Amina slowly turned her head back to him, her eyes burning with rage. And then she attacked. She grabbed a chair and swung it at him, sending him crashing into the blackboard. Before he could stand, she lifted a desk and slammed it down. Mr. Okonjo did not get up. He was carried away that evening, bruised, broken, and unconscious. By the next morning, he was gone. Some said he was in the hospital. Others believed he had left the school in shame. One thing was clear. Amina had won, and the fear that spread through the school that day, it would never leave. The staff room was in chaos. Teachers whispered among themselves, their faces pale with fear. 5 of them had already resigned, unwilling to stay in a school where one student ruled with violence. Mr. Babajid, the principal, sat silently in his chair. He was a stern and respected man, but even he felt uneasy. Still, enough was enough. Amina had to be stopped. The next morning at the school assembly, he stepped forward. The entire school fell silent. "Amina," he said, his voice echoing through the yard, "you are hereby expelled from Agilent Community School." Leave immediately. Murmurs, gasps. Students exchanged nervous glances. Would she actually leave? Amina stood in the crowd, arms crossed, a small smirk playing on her lips. Then she laughed. Expelled? She mocked. And who will make me leave? Mr. Babajide's jaw tightened. He had been running this school for over 20 years, yet this one girl had turned everything upside down. I said leave. His voice was sharper this time. Amina took a step forward, tilting her head. Or what? The students held their breath. The teachers took a step back. Mr. Babajide, frustrated and embarrassed, did something he would regret. He pushed her. Big mistake. Before anyone could react, Amina's fist collided with his face. A sickening crack echoed across the yard. His nose shattered. He stumbled back, blood pouring from his nostrils. But Amina wasn't done. She delivered another brutal punch. 2 of his teeth flew out. The principal collapsed. Screams. Chaos. Teachers ran to help, but no one dared to touch Amina. That evening, an ambulance took Mr. Babajide to the hospital. By the next morning, 5 more teachers had resigned. Amina didn't just rule the school anymore. She owned it. The school was on the verge of collapse. Teachers were quitting. Students lived in fear. The principal lay in the hospital, his face swollen beyond recognition. Something had to be done. That afternoon, 4 male teachers, the strongest, toughest men in the school, gathered in the staff room. They weren't ordinary teachers. They were once athletes, fighters, and disciplined men. She's just a girl, one of them muttered. A dangerous girl, another corrected. We take her down today, the third said. The plan was set. During the next morning's break, the 4 teachers marched into Amina's classroom. Amina, one of them barked. Follow us. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Not interested. One of them grabbed her arm. Big mistake. Amina twisted free with ease. Before he could react, she grabbed a wooden desk and swung it into his ribs. He crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. The other 3 rushed at her. The classroom turned into a battlefield. Chairs shattered, desks flipped over, books flew in every direction. Amina fought like a wild storm, using everything around her as a weapon. One teacher went down, then another, then the last one. She stood in the middle of the destruction, barely out of breath, as the 4 grown men lay sprawled across the floor, defeated. Outside, the entire school had gathered, peeking through the windows. No one spoke. No one cheered. They just stared. Amina had defeated 4 men, at once. That night, the village whispered, "She isn't human. She's cursed. She's unstoppable." And Amina? She smirked to herself in the darkness. She had won again. But deep inside, deep inside, she felt something she had never felt before. An emptiness. A hollow space that no fight could ever fill. Amina walked home that evening, her knuckles still bruised from the fight. The school feared her. The village whispered about her. She had won again. But as she approached the small rundown house she called home, the feeling of victory vanished. Shouting, glass shattering, her mother's cries. Amina sighed. The same story, every night. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The stench of alcohol hit her first. Her father, Adewale, sat in a chair, a bottle of cheap gin in one hand. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt stained with old sweat. On the floor, her mother, Nkem, lay curled up, her lip bleeding. Adewale looked up, his gaze settling on Amina. Something dark flashed in his eyes. "Look who's back," he slurred. "The great fighter." Amina clenched her fists but said nothing. Her mother looked up at her, eyes filled with silent pleading. "Don't fight him, not tonight." But Amina had never known how to stay silent. "Why don't you fight someone your own size?" she snapped. Adewale's face twisted with rage. He stood up, his large frame towering over her. "Maybe I should start with you," he growled. Amina didn't flinch. She had stopped flinching years ago. The first time he hit her, she was 8. She had tried to stop him from hurting her mother. He had thrown her against the wall so hard she blacked out. When she woke up, she wasn't the same little girl anymore. She had learned one important lesson that day. Tears were weakness. Pain was a lesson. And if she wanted to survive, she had to be stronger than everyone else. So now as her father raised his hand, she didn't step back. She stared him down, her eyes filled with something even he didn't understand. For the first time, Adewale hesitated. Amina scoffed. "That's what I thought." Then she walked away, stepping over the broken glass, stepping over her mother's pain, stepping over everything she refused to feel. The school feared her. The village whispered about her. But no one ever knew that the greatest fight Amina faced wasn't in the classroom. It was right here, at home. The day the soldiers arrived at Agilet Community School, the air was tense. It was time for the National Youth Service Corps orientation, an event meant to instill discipline and patriotism in students. Amina couldn't care less. While the entire school stood in rows, singing the national anthem, she strolled in casually, swinging her bag over her shoulder. The murmurs started immediately. Does she ever learn? Not even the soldiers can control her. One of the soldiers, a tall man with a hard face and stern eyes, stepped forward. Sergeant Musa. "You!" he barked, pointing at Amina. "Why are you late?" Amina shrugged. "Because I felt like it." The entire school gasped. Sergeant Musa's jaw tightened. "Do you know the importance of this anthem?" Amina smirked. "Do you?" The crowd froze. One of the students whispered, "She's crazy." Sergeant Musa's face darkened. He took a step closer. "Recite the anthem." Amina crossed her arms. "No." The crowd held their breath. The sergeant grabbed her arm. "I said, slap!" Amina's hand flew across his face. The sound echoed across the silent schoolyard. The world seemed to stop. Students froze. Teachers forgot how to breathe. Amina had just slapped a soldier. Sergeant Musa's cheek burned red. His expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. Without a word, he signaled to his men. In seconds, 2 soldiers grabbed Amina's arms. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, but this time, her strength meant nothing. The soldiers were trained, disciplined, stronger than any teacher she had faced. She fought, she screamed, she cursed, but they dragged her across the schoolyard, past the silent students, past the trembling teachers, past the fearful principal. For the first time in her life, Amina was being taken somewhere she could not control. The barracks. And this time, there would be no escape. The moment Amina was thrown into the barracks, she knew this was different. She had fought students. She had fought teachers. She had even fought a principal. But she had never fought soldiers. The first night she sat alone on the hard, cold ground, her hands tied behind her back. No one spoke to her. No one explained anything. She waited, but no one came to save her. At dawn, the punishment began. Day 1, the fight. "Get up!" a soldier barked. Amina didn't move. A whip cracked across her back. She bit her tongue, refusing to scream. "Get up!" the soldier repeated. Amina spat blood onto the ground and smirked. "That all you got?" They made her roll in mud. They made her crawl under barbed wire. They made her carry heavy sandbags in the scorching sun. She fought them. She cursed. She laughed in their faces. But the soldiers were not teachers. They were not students. They were merciless. Day 2, the weakness. Her body ached. Her muscles burned. Her lips were cracked from thirst. Still, she refused to break. But something felt different. For the first time in her life, Amina was not in control. The soldiers did not fear her. The soldiers did not flinch at her threats. They only pushed harder. Her vision blurred. Her legs trembled. But she kept standing. Day 3, the fall. That morning when the whistle blew, Amina didn't move. A soldier kicked dust onto her face. "Get up!" She tried, but her body refused. Her hands shook. Her legs buckled. The great Amina, the terror of Agilet Community School, couldn't even stand. She lay on the ground, breathing heavily, and for the first time she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel. Defeat. Tears burned in her eyes. She clenched her fists, but there was nothing left to fight with. Somewhere in the distance, a voice spoke. "Let her rest." The soldiers turned. A young man in a khaki uniform stepped forward. Jide, a Corps member, one of the new recruits. "She's had enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. The soldiers scoffed. "She disrespected a soldier. She deserves worse." "She doesn't need more punishment," Jide said. "She needs guidance." The commander watched in silence. Then after a long pause, he nodded. "Fine," he said. "She goes with you. But if she ever causes trouble again, you will face the punishment instead." Jide's eyes didn't waver. "I'll take that risk." The soldiers untied Amina's hands. Jide reached out a hand. Amina stared at it. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't trying to fight her. Someone wasn't trying to break her. Someone was offering her a choice. And for the first time, Amina took it. Amina limped back into Aguilet village. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the dusty pass. Her once fierce eyes were dull. Her body, once unbreakable, now moved with pain. But the real pain was not physical. It was the whispers. "She's back. Look at her. Where's her pride now?" The soldiers broke her. Amina kept walking. She passed students who once feared her, teachers who once dreaded her presence. Even the principal, still recovering from his injuries, watched her from his office window. A slow smirk crossed his face. "She has finally met her match," he murmured. But Amina did not react. She did not glare. She did not smirk. She simply kept walking. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to prove. Jide followed her to the old schoolyard. She sat on a broken bench, staring at the ground. The silence stretched. Then Jide spoke. "You fought the whole world, Amina," he said. "But what did it give you?" Amina clenched her fists. "Respect." Jide sighed. "Number fear. There's a difference." She didn't reply. Jide sat beside her. "I used to be angry too, you know." Amina finally looked at him. Jide's eyes held something she had never seen before. Understanding. "My father was a drunk. My mother left when I was a boy. I fought everyone to survive," he admitted. "But one day I realized something." Amina frowned. "What?" Jide smiled. "Strength isn't about breaking people, Amina. It's about building something greater than yourself." The words hit something deep inside her. For the first time, Amina questioned herself. Could she be different? Did she even know how? The challenge. Can Amina change? The school held a meeting. The principal, teachers, and students all gathered. Amina stood in front of them, her posture stiff. "This school has suffered enough," the principal said. "Amina has one last chance. If she stays, she will follow strict conditions." The conditions were simple. She must apologize publicly. She must help repair the damage she caused. The students laughed. "Amina? Apologize? Impossible!" Amina felt rage rise in her chest. She wanted to fight. She wanted to shut them up. But then she saw Jide. His words echoed in her mind. Strength isn't about breaking people. She took a deep breath, and she nodded. "I'll do it." Amina, the terror of Agilet Community School, had just agreed to change. But could she really do it? Again, Amina's first apology was to the one person she had hurt the most, Obadele. She found him near the school gate, surrounded by friends. At first, he stiffened when he saw her. The scars on his face, her doing, were a permanent reminder of their last fight. Amina swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she said. The entire school froze. No one had ever heard those words come from her mouth. Obadele's expression was unreadable. Then after a long pause, he slowly nodded. Amina exhaled, one step forward, but many more to go. Amina stood before the entire school staff, teachers who had feared her, teachers she had disrespected. The principal leaned forward. "Words are not enough," he said. "You must prove your change." And so her real test began. She was assigned tasks, cleaning classrooms she once destroyed, fixing chairs she once broke, tutoring younger students instead of terrorizing them. She faced mockery, she faced doubt, but she did not react. Slowly, something shifted. Teachers began to nod in approval. Younger students stopped fearing her. For the first time, people looked at Amina not with fear, but with respect. Weeks passed. Amina no longer fought. She no longer ruled by fear. She started helping students instead. One day, as she was helping a younger girl with her homework, Jide walked by and smiled. "See," he said, "the fire in you wasn't meant to destroy. It was meant to lead." For the first time in her life, Amina smiled back. She had spent years fighting the world, but maybe, just maybe, She had been fighting the wrong battle all along. One night, Amina walked home under the dim glow of lanterns. The village was quiet, but something felt wrong. Then she heard it. A woman's scream, her mother's scream. Amina's feet froze. Her heart pounded. She knew this sound. She had heard it 1,000 times before. She raced to the house, pushing the door open. And there he was, Adewale, her father, drunk, furious, raising his hand to strike her mother again. Amina's fist clenched. The old Amina would have attacked him. She would have fought just as she had done all her life. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She stepped forward and said, "No." Adewale turned, his bloodshot eyes locking onto hers. "You think you can stop me?" he slurred. Amina stood tall. "You will not touch her again." There was no rage in her voice, no desperation, just strength. Adewale hesitated. For the first time in her life, her father backed away. He mumbled a curse under his breath, grabbed his bottle, and stumbled out into the night. And just like that, Amina was free. Her mother collapsed, sobbing. Amina sat beside her and held her for the first time in years. They stayed like that, wrapped in silence. A silence that was no longer filled with fear. The next morning, the entire school gathered for assembly. The principal, teachers, and students waited. They knew something was coming. Amina stepped onto the stage. She took a deep breath and faced them all. Her voice was steady. "I was once a storm," she said. "But storms only destroy. I want to build now." The students murmured. The teachers nodded. Even the principal, who had once despised her, gave her a small smile. Amina was no longer the terror of Agile Community School. She was something else, something greater. Years passed. Amina graduated, not as a feared warrior, but as a leader. She joined Jide's outreach program, helping troubled children like herself. One day she stood before a new group of students. Some were angry, just as she had been. Some were lost, just as she had been. Amina looked at them and smiled. "Once upon a time, I thought strength was about fear," she said. "But true strength is about change." The cycle was broken. Amina was no longer a storm. She was a guiding light. The end.